Maplestory the Novel, Season 1, Sacred Tears. Written by Tatsumari Korisuno. Chapter 3, Part 1. Light. You and I both know what our contract says. Didn't you say this would be the best course of action?
You promised that our power would never be used for personal gain.
Ariel seethed, looking in his tepid eyes under the shadow of his cloak. Holding up his hand, a scroll unraveled, revealing a highlighted sentence in the middle of the page. Our promise states that our child's power would better the world once they came of age. You should remember, we both drew up this contract. Slow growled, holding up the contract for Ariel to better see her own handwriting.
You don't want to better the world. You want to destroy it. Why? Why would you destroy it all? There is such beauty here.
Ariel cried as he reached up to cup her jaw, stopped by Ariel grabbing his wrist.
There is nothing worth saving,
he said, tilting his head to the side, almost as if he too were sad that it had to be done.
But why her? Do you know what such an act will turn her into? Her heart will be lost to the darkness if you do this.
Ariel begged, looking away until he gently reached up to the hair on the side of her head, gripping it so hard, so quickly that it made her yelp as he turned her head to face him. It will create in her the power she was always meant to have. The end. Now let our daughter come with me to fulfill what she was always meant to be. Slow hissed, obviously holding back a great deal as he spoke through clenched teeth.
I will never hand her over to you.
Ariel swallowed, glaring at him from over her cheeks, making him chuckle. Dane and Menodora visited dozens of people within Margata. Taking note of people's reactions, they invited to a town-wide celebration of music, dancing, food, and good company. With each invitation, the darkness appeared to separate from the person for a short while. As they continued, Dane felt a strange phenomenon. It was as if the darkness became agitated, trying to gain a better grip on the person invited. Menodora noted the same feeling, beginning to wonder if the darkness was more than merely an imbalance of sorrow in people's hearts. Those who suffered loss, disappointment, or had been depressed for some time were invited with a much gentler tone. Both Dane and Menodora noticed the clinging darkness felt as if it were eating away at their very soul. Unknowingly, the two of them would accelerate their conversation just to get away from the spirit-crushing presence hanging around those people. It was difficult at times, since the people whom this darkness gravitated to talked with such depressing tones, trying to infect them like a virus. But eventually, the invitations were given out, and on the appointed day, scores of people came. Everyone laughed. Children played freely amidst the food and drinks readily available to everyone. Between talking to people, grabbing up snacks, and monitoring the atmosphere of the celebration, Dane and Menodora would venture to the outskirts of the city. Stark changes could be felt as they left the main square. The streets were dimmer and colder than they were at the celebration. The darkness felt as if it were waiting to infect them once the party was over.
It's a start, but this is still not enough,
Dane sighed, writing down his thoughts as he would walk.
I didn't expect that it would cure the world. I mean, there are some in the square that you can still feel a heavier presence around.
Menodora answered sharply. Dane nodded, looking back over his notes and confirming what she had said.
I too noticed this. Perhaps there is something else, something far deeper that we aren't seeing,
Dane interjected. Menodora chuckled, and Dane felt a rise of darkness near him.
I know there's something that you don't see,
Menodora muttered under her breath. Dane looked over, noting that the rise he felt was centered around her.
What was it that you said, Menodora?
Dane asked, tucking his pencil and notebook away. Throwing her arms forward with a frustrated huff, Menodora almost shouted at Dane.
Don't tell me you can't see it!
I honestly do not have a clue what you are talking about, Menodora. What is it?
Menodora threw up her arms and stamped her foot, turning back to Dane with a reddened face.
You are so blind? You honestly can't see all the women that you talked to at the party were flirting with you? And you did nothing to sway them.
Dane sighed hard, thinking back over his interactions at the party and noting that there were, indeed, quite a few women that would freely talk with him. But he gave no thought to them or how they would affect his relationship with Menodora.
Why would this upset you? It should be well established that I have no intention of courting another woman,
he answered. Menodora clenched her fists tightly, eventually throwing her notebook at Dane.
Why would it upset me? Why would it... You wouldn't make him go away! You just sit there and listen to their compliments and adoration, smiling as if you were enjoying it. Isn't my adoration enough? Can't I be the only person you need?
Menodora asked. Dane picked up the journal, reaching out to put his arms around her. Menodora backed away, her brimming eyes waiting for an answer.
Menodora, you are the only person I have ever needed, and the only person to ever try and understand how I think. I am not seeking attention from others. I have all I need in you. I could finish this journey on my own. However, I do not wish to.
As Dane spoke, he noted that the dark feeling around Menodora dissipated. Not entirely, but significantly.
You never cease to amaze me, Dane. How can you be so infuriating and so enticing at the same time?
She asked, sniffling slightly as her brimming eyes receded.
That is my curse, I suppose. Every time I look in the mirror, it is a constant reminder that I am unique in so many ways. In some cases, so much so that it has left me feeling isolated, that no one person could see the world as I do. And I have found that in you. You surprise me as well. Your compassion to so many, your deep thoughts in watching a sunset, your thirst for finding answers in places that no one would think to even peek.
Menodora sighed long, reaching out her hand and placing it in his, immediately feeling better than she had in the past few minutes. She knew deep down that Dane didn't entertain any thoughts of other women, but it was still frustrating that he did nothing to dissuade the multitude of women that would attempt to sway him.
I'm still mad at you,
Menodora huffed, as Dane smirked and put his arms around her, this time pulling her close.
I am aware. In the future, I will attempt to curb others' approaches, though I cannot say that I'll always remember.
Menodora breathed a sigh. Being with Dane was many things, but at least it would never be boring. The day after the party, the entirety of the city seemed brighter. The mood had lifted, allowing those that had been stuck to charge ahead without reservation. Menodora and Dane wove through Margata, talking with dozens of people. Those that had been depressed expressed how they were genuinely able to smile. Those who had lost loved ones expressed how they were able to share memories, and still others simply thanked them for the beautiful gathering. Their wandering brought them to the Great Circle, where they watched the scientists perform experiments on Dr. Long's new body. Despite some of them failing, no darkness appeared, nor did any swell around those involved. Dane and Menodora compared notes in the evening, confirming that whatever this darkness was, it was countered by light. Menodora concluded that to understand what light was, they would need to find a city with an abundance of happiness and compare it to Margata. Once all their needed supplies had been gathered, Dane and Menodora left to find this place, planning to watch the sunset as it painted the deserts of Nihal. But as they exited the borders of the city, a weight dropped onto their chest, forcing them to their knees. The world around them became darker, nearly bringing them to tears as an invisible force slowly flowed around them towards the city.
What is that?
Menodora asked, struggling to compose herself and regain her footing.
This must be the darkness within the world. How could darkness still be so powerful and flowing towards the city, no less?
Dane exclaimed, reaching into his sleeve to consult the mage's journal. Menodora managed to regain herself and look over his shoulder as he turned pages, putting her hand between the sheets when she saw something that caught her eye.
Wait, go back,
she asked. Dane returned a few pages, reading over what Menodora had found as she read it aloud.
Why is it that as I enter the city, the darkness seems to subside?
However, as I leave, I notice that the point where I ceased feeling this darkness is closer than before. Is this my doing? Perhaps I shall find my answers as I travel.
Do you think he had the same experience we just did?
Menodora asked. Dane read it over again, holding his chin in thought.
Perhaps he did, but to a much lesser extent it seems,
Dane surmised, turning to later pages for something that would explain it, yet no clues or additional mentions came as he reached the end of the journal.
What if the light is attracting the darkness or settling back into place?
Menodora asked, taking out her notebook and reading over some of the statements from the people of Margata that she had written down.
How do you mean?
Dane asked. He had a theory of his own, but as he had seen many times before, Menodora could come up with answers that he hadn't considered.
Think of a pond. If you were to throw a massive boulder into it, the water would be pushed aside quite quickly but eventually settle back into its original place. What if the darkness of the world and the ultimate light works the same? After a mass gathering of light, it pushes the darkness away, and it slowly comes back into place.
Dane concentrated for a few moments, the glow of magic igniting in his eyes, and he looked over the dunes outside Margata. All around him, he could see portions of the darkness seemingly pulled into the city, rather than merely flowing back in. Dane pointed this out to Menodora, as her eyes too glowed to see the darkness.
What if the intentional direction of the ultimate light is the cause? She asked,
looking back at the city, then looking back at the darkness.
The people of Margata are expressing their joy, or rather light, in an inward direction, the city of Margata. If this is the case, then it won't spread to the world. It may push the darkness back initially, but because of its inward focus, it will pull the darkness back if given enough time.
She further explained, gathering momentum as she looked over her notes.
That could explain why we felt such a stark difference. The source of joy and light was, say, Margata. Our light was being extinguished once we crossed the threshold between darkness and light because we were no longer within the city's protections despite its inward-facing property.
Menodora spoke faster and faster, talking so fast that her face began to brighten into a broad smile. Her smile was infectious, and soon Dane could feel the corners of his own mouth turning up into a grin. Around them, the air seemed to brighten, lessening the pressing presence.
What is happening?
Menodora asked, looking at the air around them.
I believe we are creating our own light. A light that is turned outward to the world around us,
answered Dane. Immediately, the two of them furiously wrote the finding in their journals. Menodora had to sharpen her pencil twice as her excited penmanship blazed across the pages and snapped the lead. Deciding to stay within Margata instead, they watched the people more closely, discovering shades of darkness as well as pockets and hues of light appearing and disappearing. People who exuded darkness almost always directed it outward, searching for people to feel the same as they did and know the pain they felt. By contrast, those that radiated light often directed it inwards, unwilling to share it with those around them unless they too had a similar hue of light. The inward-facing trait of this light also led to those people being affected by darkness all the faster. Inward-directed light not only absorbed and fed off others' light, but would equally absorb and feed off another's darkness. If they lingered too long near a source of darkness, their light would eventually be overcome and create another source of outward-facing darkness. There were, however, some sources of outward-facing light. This hue was brighter and more potent than others. It was always created by one person genuinely wanting another to feel joy, one who cared for the hurts of others. The light was strong enough to burn away one's darkness and reignite the light within them. Unfortunately, it often came at a price. The person exuding the outward light would become drained after some time, as if they were giving their own light away. Menodora witnessed one of these people give so much of their light away that they became another source of darkness. If these people didn't take time to care for their well-being, the light in their soul would burn out, becoming angry and resentful.